People call it the Screaming Woods, not because they hear one scream, but because they hear it twice. The first time is far away, buried deep in the trees, thin enough to explain away. A fox, the wind, someone else in the woods. The second time is closer, not louder, closer. And that's when most people leave, not running, not panicking, just leaving. As if the forest has quietly decided they've stayed long enough. Daring Woods sits in Kent, England. It looks quite ordinary in photographs. A narrow path, dark trunks, a slope that swallows light. But it has a reputation that refuses to fade, because the story isn't that something lives there. It's that people venture in, they feel wrong, and leave early. And later, when they try to explain why their reasons never match except for one detail, they all say it sounded like a woman screaming. In England, haunted woods are old news. Every county has a lane where a horse refuses to walk, a copse where a lantern floats, a footpath that feels colder than it should. So daring should have blended into the background. Instead, it became a place people deliberately test. Teenagers, urban explorers, couples with a camera and a plan to prove everyone wrong. And almost all of them make the same mistake. They treat the forest like a room, a container you enter and leave unchanged. But daring doesn't behave like a room. It behaves like a threshold. You don't notice it at first. You park nearby, step through a gap in the hedge, and everything feels normal. The air is damp in that quiet English way. The ground gives slightly under your shoes. The first minutes are easy, too easy. Then the trees begin to feel closer than they should, not because they move, but because your sense of distance softens, like a camera slipping out of focus. This is when people start checking things without realizing it. They glance back at the path. They reach for their phone. They laugh softly, just to hear their own voice. And then, somewhere ahead, comes the scream. Not a clean sound, not theatrical. It's ragged, interrupted, like someone trying to keep it down and failing. If you've never heard an animal scream in the dark, your brain has no good place to put it. A fox can sound human. A deer can sound like a child. Even the wind can hit a pitch that snaps your nerves. So you tell yourself a story. Fox, wind, someone joking. And for a moment, the story works. Then you hear it again. Closer, not louder, closer. What almost nobody talks about is what happens when someone ignores the second scream, when they decide not to turn back and keep walking anyway. That second scream is the one people remember years later, because it doesn't feel like sound traveling. It feels like presence, like someone just out of sight has turned their head and is now facing you. At this point, visitors tend to split into two types. The first leave immediately. No debate, no curiosity. The second try to win. They call out. They shine a flashlight into the trees. They step off the path. And that's when daring begins to feel like it has rules. People describe small, humiliating failures. A torch flickering with fresh batteries, a phone losing signal all at once, a compass app spinning like it's confused. They describe the path stretching not dramatically, just enough to feel wrong. They describe footsteps that don't match their own. A second set, always half a beat behind. And then the silence arrives. Not quiet. Silence. The kind where you realize the birds have stopped and the absence feels deliberate. Stories from daring mention shapes between trees, pale figures, faces that vanish when you look straight at them. But the details never fully agree. What does remain consistent is the sensation. People feel watched, not chased, not threatened, watched, as if the forest is measuring them, deciding whether they belong. The reason daring woods unsettles people isn't because it traps anyone. It's because it lets everyone leave. The screaming acts like a boundary, a warning without words, a sound your body understands faster than your mind. Many people return later, embarrassed by how quickly they left, and almost all of them turn back sooner the second time, because the forest feels consistent, not random. If Daring Woods is haunted, it isn't haunted by a story with a beginning and an end. It's haunted like a scar, a place where something keeps pressing through the same emotional shape. That's why the legend survives. Not because people see something, but because they leave with the same thought. Not I saw something, but I shouldn't have been there. The most unsettling thing about Daring Woods is how little it has to do. It doesn't need to appear. It doesn't need to chase. It only needs to make you feel, for one moment, like you've stepped into the wrong place at the wrong time. And once you've felt that, the screaming becomes secondary, because the sound you remember most is your own breathing changing, getting shorter, quieter, as if you are trying not to be noticed. So if you ever hear something crying out in the woods at night, pay attention to what your body does next. Because Daring Woods doesn't force you out. It convinces you. And if you want more stories like this, about places that don't just scare people, but change them, subscribe to Moonlit Archives. And tell me in the comments which you think is worse. A place that wants you, or a place that rejects you. Because in Daring Woods, the screaming may not be a threat at all.